Illnesses, especially rare and chronic diseases, often evoke feelings of indescribable fear and helplessness. We need more research, more allies, and more advocates, and I consider myself a soldier in this fight. Welcome to Chronic Illnesses and Advocacy. My name is Lakshmi, and today we have Mr. Dave deBronkart, also known as E-Patient Dave. After beating stage 4 kidney cancer in 2007, he went on to become a blogger, health policy advisor, and an accomplished international keynote speaker. Dave's viral TED Talk, Let Patients Help, will be linked below. Thank you so much for your time.
It's great to be here. The social activists love to have a microphone.
Yeah. So could you please talk a bit about your kidney cancer diagnosis and what that was like in terms of lifestyle?
Lifestyle, like stop everything. So no, seriously, in my family, we like to say even in stressful times, you got to have a sense of humor. But it was January 2007, so it was 16 years ago. I went in for a regular physical, and as part of that, I had a sore shoulder. And as a result of that, I got a shoulder x-ray. And the next day, I'll never forget, it's funny how a moment like this can be burned in your memory, the moment where you get news that you'll never forget. My doctor said, your shoulder's going to be fine. You've just got a rotator cuff problem. But there's something in your lung. And incidentally, in the shoulder x-ray had spotted a tumor in my lung. We didn't know yet that it was a tumor, but we quickly learned that. And to make a long story short, within a few weeks, I knew that the best available data said my median survival was 24 weeks. That half the people in that particular study were dead, in my condition, were dead 24 weeks later. And that will focus the mind. I quickly realized that I had nothing more important to do than learn what I could and help the doctors save me. To make a long story short, I got a treatment that usually doesn't work. It doesn't have any effect. It was an early immunotherapy. And when it does work, about 4% of the time, it kills the patient with the bad side effects. And importantly, my doctor, the famous Dr. Danny Sands, he's famous in my circles anyway, was one of the pioneers of encouraging patients to use the internet to connect with information and each other. And unlike doctors who stay off the internet, he showed me where to find the good stuff. And I got priceless information on how to survive the side effects, information that doesn't exist in the literature. And I was diagnosed in January, and by July, my treatment had ended. By September, they said, it looks like you beat it. I was all better. And so I spend a lot of time saying, to make a long story short, because I'll let you be the guide on what we should talk about.
So what do you think was or is the most rewarding part about being an advocate?
There's something about facing death that makes you think, what have I done with my life? Or what will I do with my life? The same people have told me the same is true when they get any kind of news that means their life isn't going to be the way they thought it was going to be. And so it brings the question, what can I do with my life? What mark will I have left on the pavement after I'm gone someday? And I would really like to improve things for patients, for sick people, for their families, and for the doctors doctors and nurses. Anytime I get sloppy sometimes, every time I say doctors, I'm talking about all the people who at some point during their education thought, you know what, I could go into medicine. I could help the sick people. I want to improve how well healthcare achieves its potential. So when I give a speech or have a conversation like this, and somebody says to me afterwards, "You've really changed how I think about things," I just feel warm inside. It makes me feel wonderful. Because the only way we can really change the way the world is going to go is if we alter how people think. So I've been lucky enough to do over 600 events in 26 countries. And it's interesting because, there are some things that are unique to the American system, especially the money aspect of healthcare. But there are other things that are universal. Patients wanting to be heard, is the one that's most relevant. And the inspiring things, I've met doctors and patients in lots of different countries where they've formed this incredible partnership where they approach together the question of, okay, we can't have everything. What should we focus on? And how can we work on it together? This thing that we call participatory medicine.
And then going back to a question that you posed in our initial email discussion, from your point of view, who do you think dictates what our health is?
Well, I have a very, very strong opinion on that. I'm the one who says whether I've got a problem. Now, some people, when they hear that, they think, look, some people are idiots. They don't know whether they have a problem or not. Well, yeah, I know, guaranteed, no matter where you are on any political spectrum, I bet there are people who think you're nuts. Let's step back from that and just think back to before there was medicine. Before, well, I mean, there were always people seeking treatments for maladies of one sort or another. To make a long story short, uh, I'm the one who decides if my doctor were to prescribe something for me for something that I don't care about. I quite honestly, I might take the pill if it's easy, but just if it's a bunch of extra work, and I really don't care about the thing, then I'm not going to be motivated to do something about it. I, and this is not just a matter of me being like a selfish toddler. Consider one of the patients in my kidney cancer patient community uh, was going through, he was having a relapse. So a couple of years later, after my sickness. And so there were new treatment options available. And he said, uh, every treatment has its pros and cons. Some were the treatment was easier to take. Some had different side effects. For him, the most important thing was that at that moment in his life, his wife had breast cancer as well, and he was her primary caregiver. And the most important thing to him in choosing a treatment was fatigue, because he wanted to maintain his energy level. We have a long tradition through history of, for centuries, there were times when doctors said, I'm the one who knows what's important. You should just listen to me and do as I say. Uh, but I'm just not going to be all that motivated. Uh, some people are. Some people just want the doctor to say, tell me what to do. That's fine with me. But, you know, if we want to work together and not be fighting each other, we really should start from, I mean, Dr. Sands wears a button in clinic on his lab coat that says, what matters to you? And that's, once we're agreed on that, that sets the foundation for us to work together on achieving it.
And what is your advice for any new advocates who may be questioning whether they can be successful or not in this field?
Well, success, first of all, success, think about what you mean by success. If you're talking about somebody making a living giving speeches around the world, there are very few people in any field who do that. So you may want to think about, how will I know if I'm on my deathbed someday, what would make me look back and say this was worth it? And so decide for yourself. Do you want more people to be aware of X, or do you want more people to realize they should do Y, or you don't think they should do Z? Do you want them to be aware that it's a good idea to go looking in medical journals if they want to, or that they can be a price shopper? Uh, that's a whole separate subject. We could talk for hours about my adventures price shopping for treatments. But once again, it's like what I said a minute ago. It comes down to, I mean, who are you in the world, and what contribution do you want to leave behind? If you can achieve that, you can be successful. You can consider it successful, or at least not a waste of your time. You can also, I'm going through something in a completely unrelated field right now in my life where I'm hoping people will hear me. And it has nothing to do with my advocacy as an engaged, empowered patient. And I'm having to try to find uh, what do I say to whom on what channel. Some people like to work through grassroots, talking to actual individuals one to one. Some people like to speak out on social media. Um, you've got to decide what you like to do and start operating.
And what do you think is the most or some of the most valuable pieces of information you've learned while navigating this field of activism and advocacy?
Liv, I want to add one thing that I should
Yeah.
have said a moment ago. Uh, you won't get much of anywhere by going around banging on drums and telling people they're idiots. So even if you think you have positively established that a particular audience is idiots or criminals or whatever, you just won't get far doing that. So you're much more likely to inspire people if you can show them some positive view of things, like a patient who helped themselves, a patient who helped somebody else, a new way of approaching things that can help things turn out better. So, sorry, I have to ask you to repeat your immediate question.
Yeah, of course. I was asking what's the most or some of the most valuable pieces of information you've learned while navigating the field of activism and advocacy?
Uh, I can only speak to what really caught my eye, caught my ear. The first may sound crazy, uh, but it actually was important. Remember, I came into this, my life had just been saved by the best of medicine. I didn't have any frustrations. I didn't have any complaints. I wasn't coming at it after a big letdown. But then I discovered that medical science, number one, is not perfect. Number two, some doctors, even if and I'm not talking about arrogant, lazy jerks, I'm talking about even if they have the best of intentions, they may be years out of date. So and for me, what that meant was it's perfectly legitimate for me to go hunting for new information because I may discover something that's valid that my doctors haven't seen. And when I do that, by the way, I don't go into them and say, hey, why didn't you tell me about this? I say, hey, look, I found this. What do you think? Right. So that's a partnership in that sense. Also, let's see, new pieces of information. Another thing to be aware of that for me is very validating. There are a lot of parallels between the patient movement and other social movements throughout history. In particular, the women's movement, which was, if you think back to the 1800s, when women started agitating to get the vote. You can learn a lot about advocacy from what they went through trying to get heard, the things that they tried and failed. One thing that definitely did not work out well is when they asked men to go to Congress for them and get them the vote, because the men made deals that the women would not have made compromises. That really went into full flower in the 1980s. I think it was in the disability rights movement. I think originally in South Africa, I might be off on that, but there was a guy named Ed Roberts who said, when someone else speaks for you, you lose. And it was only when the disability activists started going to Congress themselves that things like the things that we take for granted today happened because of them. When I was a kid, there was no such thing as a curb cut that a wheelchair could go through. You didn't have braille on elevator buttons so that blind people or vision impaired people could navigate themselves. It was only when the people who have the problem got involved in solving the problem, right, that it worked. So, and this is big time encouragement for anybody to speak up. This shows up today in clinical trials and research because patients in an increasing number of fields are starting to say, hey, wait a minute, you guys are working on this over here. We want you working on this. And my point again about the long tradition of activism, in this specific area, the pioneers were the people in the HIV/AIDS movement in the 1980s who literally went to the FDA and staged interventions, disruptions, and said, you guys are studying the disease. We want you to freaking work on cures. Stop what you're doing. So there, my point here is there is a long, valid tradition of activists saying, you people in power are not getting the job done. Do this instead. So be encouraged and don't let them shut you down. Do what you can to inspire them, but if they're not hearing you, don't stop telling them.
Thank you for your time and for joining us. I thought your insight and experiences are honestly really priceless. It was a privilege to interview you, so thank you.
Well, thank you. I want to encourage you for being bold enough to step up and be doing what I'm talking about. So I talked about the women's movement in the 1800s. I talked about the HIV activists. I talked about the disability rights movement. The most recent example, which is fresh in our minds, is this thing called long COVID, because it was the long COVID patients who stepped up and said, hey, we're having this problem. The National Institutes of Health didn't hear them at first. They took their own notes, they measured their own stuff, and they convinced the NIH. And now everybody recognizes, number one, that long COVID is a real thing, and that it has, and number two, the NIH even renamed it. It was being called post-COVID, blah, blah, blah. Now it's officially long COVID. So do it, be bold, and stick to who you really are.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Go for it.